When looking at the data, as I alluded to before, will speed really help me get to the next level? Will understanding the data really help me get to the next level? And behind here we have images from our fusion sport. In the next two, we're going to show and deep dive for you guys how this actually works and how you can begin to organize your programming with your intensities, with your loads, and with your weekly volume. So moderating intensity. This is now taking the 13-week block structure that we have talked about. So we have our 13-week blocks. Now we look at our acclimation, weeks 1 through 2. What's our objective? We've talked about this: increasing tissue resiliency, building work capacity, building the engine, and accumulating as much strength potential as possible. Intensities are going to be a lot lower, again, because I'm not running maximally here. So these are sub-max intensities, so I can handle more volume. Ranges of motion are the longest. Weekly volume, we're going to accumulate the most. Density, a term by Altus and Stuart McGill, is the total reps. This is where we're going to be able to handle the most sets and reps. And then stance is unilateral. This refers to what's happening kinematically in the weight room that we need to be prioritizing. Week 3, we test across the board, as you guys can see here. Now, during acceleration and accumulation, this is an extension of our acclimation. So this is our intro to weighted power work via resisted sprints and also some weighted unilateral work. This is now intensity improves because our distances are now increased. Ranges of motion. Now our ranges of motion are a little bit longer, but they go to a little bit shorter as our distances improve. Weekly volume is moderate and medium. Our density between 4 to 12 reps per session. So depending on a sprint, I would never perform 10 to 12 weighted sprints in a particular session. So when you look at here, our density, that is in a given week of how much volume we're trying to attain. Stance is unilateral still, because we're still in those earlier phases of acceleration and developing unilateral strength for all the reasons we've mentioned before. This is why we still stick with this stance in the weight room. Now when you see our transition to power intensification, the next 3 weeks, now we're really increasing the intensity of our power work. So now what we're looking for is intensity is going to improve with both our speed, our power, and our strength. Our ranges of motion are decreasing. Now we're trying to get rid of volume to help mitigate fatigue. Our density is going down. But like we talked about before, now we want to utilize bilateral movements to help match what is being experienced from a sprinting and power standpoint. Lastly, as we get into our absolute speed realization, just to recap everything that we've been talking about, now this is where we're increasing maximal CNS output. We're developing, or working at, I should say, the highest intensities. Ranges of motions are the shortest, volume is the less, density is the absolute less, and now bilateral and shorter ranges of motion in the weight room to help match this curve. Lastly, we test here in week 3. So testing in week 3 here is now where we get our comparison of what we did in week 3. Now we have a good sample size. Have we improved between 4.8 and 8.4% respectively? So now this is something that we have worked on a lot of. So now this is where we pull everything together. In my opinion, this is probably the most valuable piece of information or graph that you guys can utilize. So this is what took a lot of trial and error to see what works. So working on this graph from left to right from where you guys see it, you can see now our phase, our acclimation phase. We know the weeks, the distances, intensity. But notice load. Load refers to how much load on the body. Are we working at body weight? Percentage of body weight. 0% during acclimation. Now, look to the far right, beyond weekly volume and density, we're looking at miles per hour in averages for prescribed distances. So we have a novice, intermediate, advanced. What is the miles per hour between 5 and 10 yards that we know that they're trending in the right direction? So I might have a novice that has a poor mile per hour through 10 yards. So I know in the following phases, they might need to spend more time in acceleration building that engine. Same thing with intermediate, same thing with advanced. As I move on though, I look at my split times. This is per prescribed distance. So an individual who has a poor split time I know that this is probably a biomechanic issue, but it's also a strength deficiency issue, because those first 0 to 2 steps are going to tell me a lot about where this individual is. Because 25% of my max velocity could be achieved in step 1 based off split time, and 40% of my max velocity could be improved by step 2. This is also based on split time. So there is a direct relationship between split time, strength deficiency, and mechanics when working on the start of the sprint. As we move on beyond testing, now we look at our acceleration accumulation. These are some of the numbers that we've played around with a little bit that are extremely important, and there's some overlap here that is very, very important to help ensure that we don't expose people too quickly to loaded sprints at given distances, at given velocities. So I'll use an example. During acceleration accumulation, we have found that starting at 50% of one's body weight is where they're going to get a lot of good work in, where their averages can still improve week after week via miles per hour and split times. Now, moving on to the next week, week 5, we transition quickly to 40%. So now it's a little bit less weight, same volume, same distance, but we're looking at miles per hour. So I know that if their miles per hour are still improving in terms of averages week after week, we can keep decreasing load as we get exposed to greater velocity. However, as we mentioned before, in our assessments and in our testing, if we see that their times are decreasing, well, then we have to go back to the drawing board. And Jacob talks about this a lot in the data section. So I know that they might need to spend more time at 40% because they need that work to build that certain physical quality that we're looking to train. And again, if you guys have access to this, this is why going back through the force velocity and the load velocity is going to matter. Because if you see the strength if you see the strength deficiencies, then you'll know that this person needs to spend more time building their engine. Maybe they need more time at 50%. They need more time at 40%. They need more time at 30%. So you need to repeatedly test after you do your weighted sprints. And we do this by testing unweighted sprints almost in a contrast fashion to see, are their averages improving. Now, look at the transition from acceleration accumulation to power intensification. Intentionally, we found that utilizing that 30% range of one's body weight for a further distance, 15, maybe 20 yards at 30%, is important. They need a lot of exposure in that transition time. This is kind of considered that attaining velocity phase, because this is where a lot of injury can occur. Injury can occur when you don't have the capacity, the technical ability, or the frequent exposure to higher velocities with a given load. Knowing this information is why we transition and we utilize a certain load, sometimes 3 weeks at a given percentage. As you move through power intensification, what you'll begin to see is we use 20% quickly as a good buffer between now our 10%. So between our power intensification and absolute speed realization, that 10% zone there, this is pivotal. This is very important as it pertains to getting them to experience that distance. Try running 10% of your body weight through 20 to 30 yards. That's a lot of load in relation to body weight, not at 50% in regards to the force experienced at running at that distance, that there could be, again, further chances of injury. So we have a lot of overlap here, and we spend a lot of time there for athletes as we bring them through this percentage profile or percentage program, if you will, to get them to, again, run unweighted sprints at 20 to 40 yards. So I hope this makes sense. So understanding how to utilize it. When looking at load, that is what we are doing per density. But then we time unweighted sprints through the same distances that we are looking for miles per hour. We do 3 of them every single time to gain the average and to see, is that average improving over time? And if that average is not, well, we go back to this individual. What deficiencies did they have in their profile? What percentages were we working at? What adjustments do we need to make in order to ensure that they're progressing week after week? So this is extremely important that you guys understand how to go about doing this. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and comment below in the section of comments on our course, and we'll answer you as soon as possible.
Do a 15-yard banded drop. I'm going to start from regular two. We're going to get two of them. One's at 50, one will be at 75. Take the bands off, get a drink. So one with the band. I'm just going to keep off, right, extending my steps, right, 75% effort, 15. Your partner's behind you, just like we did last week.